Hello. This video is intended to give you a little bit of background on conducting the literature review assignment for our diversity class. You might have done assignments like this in your research methods classes, for instance, or some other upper level classes. And if so, this would hopefully be a review for you. If there are any differences between what previous professors asked you to do and what I'm asking you to do, if there's some conflict, you see some contradictions, please be in touch with me. I want to make sure that I'm not that you're understanding my directions as I'm intending them. Okay. This should not, this video should not take the place of you first reading the assignment as it has been posted. I reposted it with the new deadlines because in the new syllabus we have revised deadlines so that your question and your list of sources isn't due until April 17th, and your final paper is not due until the last time period for our final exam, which is 2:30 on May 5th. That is all been changed on the newest edition of the assignment description, which you can find on our My Courses site. So please do read that in addition to listening to this video. Okay. So I want to explain a little bit why I give this assignment. It's a little bit different. For this class in particular and for this portion of the class in particular, I thought it was important because so often debates about race in American politics come from the heart rather than the head. And while there's nothing wrong with that, the stronger arguments and the ones where we can actually get to the source of what we know come from research, come from the head, come from using facts and information that we know and applying it to what we think. So that rather than debating on about I feel something, you can debate more solidly on I have an opinion based on recognized academic research and therefore I have reached this conclusion. So I want us to begin to think about that a little bit. More broadly, I think this helps us to think about how we know what we know. How is it that we come up with answers to questions in the social sciences in particular? Answers that we know about voting behavior. Answers that we know about the way constituencies and their legislators interact. Answers to questions that we know about the way judges vote on appellate courts. How do we know these things? And this assignment, I hope, will encourage you to think about that. And then finally, it pushes us, I think, a little bit to think about important questions in debates about race and politics in the United States. Because in having to choose your own question, you'll have to kind of sort through those questions that are of interest to you to find something that you think that you will be able to find some literature on, some background on, and get involved in a little more detail. So that's why I chose this assignment for this portion of our class. Now, the purpose of literature reviews overall in academic research are important. In academic research for scholars, for people who are getting their master's degree or their PhD, who are teaching scholars, who are professors in universities, their research, each specific piece of their research involves a question that can be answered by some sort of quantitative or qualitative research. How do you choose the question you want to study? Well, you choose a topic that interests you because by and large you're going to be spending a substantial degree of time on this, so you want something that interests you. And you need to find a question that's focused, that could be answered by original research. The research you would do, and not that you have to, but in preparing the literature review, you're thinking about what if you were going to be doing the research. It's not the same kind of question that you would answer in a research paper where you take what other people have written from their research and you just kind of summarize it. This is different than that. This is looking at what other people have done in regard to their research and seeing what kind of avenue that opens for you to be able to do some new and interesting research. So that's why the kinds of questions that people want to answer. And to do that, you want to know what has already been written about your topic. You want to know what questions people have answered, what questions haven't people answered, how scholars who have done research on your topic have gone off in different directions and why they've gone in different directions and that their answer to the question may be somewhat different. How do we explain that? You don't want to reinvent the wheel if you're doing research. It takes way too much time. So you want to ask a question that is still pertinent, that is still interesting, where there might be some debate within the field or where there's a niche that nobody has looked at yet. How is your research going to engage with the questions and the discussion that has already been occurring in regard to the literature, okay? And then from that, you develop a hypothesis, right? In light of what I know that other people have answered to this question about why, for instance, I think the example of why do appellate court judges vote in a particular way in particular kinds of cases? Well, here's what other scholars have said. There's some difference of opinion on them. I think that this is a stronger hypothesis, that I'm going to add something new and interesting to it, and here's the answer I think I'm going to find to that question. Right? I think that judges who have brown hair are going to vote a certain way. Obviously, not a reasonable hypothesis, but that's the idea. Okay. Now, obviously, you're not going to be doing this complete set of research, but I just thought it was important that you understand why scholars do these in the first place, because in the back of your mind, that helps you to understand the focus and the direction that a literature review takes. So in general, and then I'm going to talk about some of these in detail, your literature review should include first an introduction that puts forth your question, and we'll talk a little bit more in a moment about how you choose a question, and that helps to put that question in context. So why does it matter? What is the context, either historically or in contemporary political debates, that make this an important question? What do we know from past history that leads us to believe this is an important question? If it were to be a question about why do appellate court judges vote the way they do, it could be a discussion of why Supreme Court cases and their opinions are so important in American politics, right? How that has become a current and contemporary debate in American politics. So you want to present your question, and you want to put it out there in a way so people think it matters. A brief introduction for purposes of this assignment. A paragraph can set it out. Then the body of your literature review, and we're going to talk about more on that in a minute, is an analysis of past works that have been done on this or similar questions. So when we talk about literature, we're not talking about great works by Dickens. Literature refers to academic articles, journal articles, books that have been written that have looked at specific research questions. So the body of your literature review is going to be looking at past research that has been done on the question you're looking at or similar questions. You want to see what else is out there, what's going on in the field in regard to discussing this. Then based on all of that, you develop a hypothesis. So if I have learned that there are 3 different schools of thought on answering the question of why appellate court judges make the decisions that they do, which one of those schools of thought do I think is going to be most pertinent to the question I'm answering, and how do I differentiate my work from the others? Right? So what do you think you're going to find if you were to do the research? You're not. It's not the expectation for this class, but I want you to think about what it is you think you might find based on what you have learned that others have in fact done in that field of study. Okay? And then last but not least, you'll have a brief conclusion, ideally that ties somehow back to your introduction. Okay? So the 2 things I want to talk about in a little more detail for you here are, first, how do you choose a research question? And then how do you develop your literature review? Okay? So in choosing your question, you're asking a why question. You want to understand the cause of something. It's not just the facts. You're looking to explain cause and effect. A little more difficult when you get to the actual research component. But you want to know why something has occurred, not just explaining what has occurred. It's not just a historical analysis. So not does something happen, do elections occur, but why does it happen, or when does it happen, or how does it happen? When do we think certain kind of changes are going to occur in the electoral systems, and why? What might make for a different kind of election in American politics? What might be the social and political context in which something different or unusual might happen? Right? So it's not a question, and this was an example that I thought of as I was doing this PowerPoint slide, a question of who was elected in 2016 and who voted for the various candidates. Although that data and information could be helpful in developing your research, you want to know, for instance, why did a certain segment of the U.S. population vote in large numbers for President Trump rather than Secretary Clinton? Sorry for the typo there. It's the why, not just who and what, but why. What does that explain? What does that tell us? And usually you're not doing it just to understand a specific election, for instance, but to understand the broader story. What does this tell us about voters? What does this tell us about voters' expectations in American politics? What does this tell us about the way candidates present themselves and the way voters respond to that, depending on what your question is, right? It's not to just look at a specific point in time, but it's to be able to feed into broader debates about voting behavior of the American public, for instance, okay? So if you're going to do this literature review as sort of a lead into doing actual research, you'd want to think about a question that's answerable. Do you have enough time to get it done? Can you actually find the evidence that will help to answer your question? Is the question narrow enough to allow you to conduct your research and draw conclusions and not be running around in a maze like this little person over here? And your question should point in a specific direction. Again, you're not going to be doing the research for this assignment, but I think it's important that you know the overall context. So that for this assignment, you'll be choosing a question that deals with the question of race in American politics. Backing up a minute, it's a question that will be why does something happen? When does something happen? How does it happen? In the question of the relation of race in American politics. It could be in the electoral system, it could be in the criminal justice system, it could be in the educational system, it could be in healthcare delivery. Bearing in mind, the emphasis should predominantly be on the political system and not just private individual activities. However, that's not a fine line between those two. So if you have any questions or concerns about whether or not your question fits within the parameters, feel free to contact me. This is also a reason why I ask you to do a first pass of giving me your question and your sources so that we can have some discussion about that. I can perhaps help you to refine and narrow that question. Actually, in doing research, one of the hardest things to do is to find the question that's going to get to what it is you are most interested in. So, okay. So the literature review itself, you've developed a question, and for the literature review, you want to put your issue in the context of what others have said. So if you have a question about, back to my appellate court judges, about why Supreme Court judges are more likely to vote a certain way on economic issues than others. What is it that leads them to those conclusions? How have people in the past answered your question? There's a lot of literature that's been done. There's a lot of research that has been done on this. You want to know what they have said, and then you want to use what they have said to show the different debates and methodologies. So that, for instance, some people who have researched the question may have used more qualitative research, some more quantitative research. Some might have used different variables. So they took into consideration race but not religion. They took into consideration gender but not age. And based on looking at what all of those other people have done, the way they've asked the question, the way they've answered the question, the way they've studied the question, you then want to see where they differ, to compare them, and then to think about what, if you were going to be doing this research, what might be helpful to you. So for selecting those works that are in your literature review, you can use the same kinds of sources we've been talking about so far. Largely what you want to emphasize are academic works. You want to use academic books and journals because that's where you're going to find the other literature, the other research that has been done on the question. Now you're also going to use non-academic works, as those listed here, that will help you to provide some background, some context, some understanding for why this question matters at all. Okay? When you're thinking, especially for the academic works, you want to think about the various sides of a debate or an argument. You don't just want to choose one side or the other, because the idea is to find where your question fits in regard to the broader debate that's going on in the broader community. Okay. A few hints. Use bibliographies. They are your friend. I think part of this PowerPoint slideshow came from a collective class that we used to teach where I used to work. And I'm pretty sure that's the language of my former colleague, Dr. Lopez, that got into this review. Bibliographies are your friend, meaning as you're reading other sources, look at who they've cited in their bibliography, and that might be helpful to you to find things. Use them to find sources. It's kind of like a treasure hunt. Read some literature reviews. This will give you some ideas. And I've posted a variety of documents on my courses, actually 2 documents, but one has links to a variety of sources, both some libraries from universities across the university libraries across the country that have a little bit more of a how-to on literature reviews, and some of those have samples. And the document I posted also has a variety of samples of literature reviews that I have found online. There's also an article written predominantly for graduate school purposes, but some of you might find that interesting as well. I posted both of those items to our My Courses site. Be careful of biased sources, as you always should be. You can include them, just acknowledge them and find some balance. And the reality is that despite the fact that we like to think that academic literature is apolitical, that's not always the case, and you just want to bear that in mind as you're reading things. So finally, you found these sources. You found these sources that deal with, in some way, the same question you're asking. So you want most of your literature review, the body of your paper, most of it is going to be how the authors do or don't answer your question, right? And the don't can be just as important, because you might be looking for a segment of your question or a piece of data that you think will be helpful that nobody's really looked at yet, right? So you want to talk about that. You don't organize by author. So Jones said this, Smith said this, Anderson said this, Pereira said this, right? You don't want to be doing that. What you do want to do is organize by topic. So either here's a series of authors who have looked at this question using this set of variables, and here's another set of authors who have looked at it using a variety of other variables, or by debates within the field. This is the theoretical assumptions that one school of thought has used, and these are the theoretical assumptions that another school of thought has used, and then talk about the various authors within those schools of thought, or within that definition by variable or by factor. It's possible in some instances you could have a chronological look, that there has been an understanding of the topic that has developed over time, and you think that you have a new way of looking at it as we shift into a different point in time. But you don't want to just run down a list of the authors and what they've said, because then you're doing no analysis really. What you want to do is do an analysis of their findings and talk about those findings and compare them to each other. Because then you're going to find where your research fits in that conversation. Some quotes are fine, but people tend to quote way too much in literature reviews because this is your analysis of the author's argument, not what they have said. So that's the most important thing to include. So that is what I expect you to present in your literature review. I'm happy to have conversations with people, and when we do meet synchronously in the next couple of class sessions, I'll talk about this in a little bit more detail, but I thought it might be helpful for you to have this as a beginning as you begin thinking about this project. Thanks for your time.